Hey everybody, so welcome back to the garage. If you're new, go ahead and click on subscribe. I would love to have you part of my community. And also click on the bell to receive all the updates on this sled, as well as other postings on this channel. So today we have an update on this 2001 Polaris XC800. Go ahead and take a look at the playlist. There's a bunch of other videos that go into detail as far as what we've been doing to this sled so far. So to get you up to date, we are waiting for the shocks to come back on the suspension. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, what we're going to do is we're going to replace the rope on the Recoil as well as replace the belt on the water pump. Both of those are essentially routine maintenance, and we're going to take care of it while we have the time. The sled has about 3,500 miles, and the rope that we're going to be replacing on the Recoil is a synthetic rope. It's good for about 5,000 pounds of pulling force, and essentially it's guaranteed never to break. If you ever roped a 800, you know there's a lot of grunt that needs to go into it to pull it over, and as a consequence, they have a tendency to break the Recoil rope. So we're doing this to avoid that, and while we're in there, we're also going to be replacing the water pump belt. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead to the steps. Alright, so to get the recoil housing off, essentially it sits right in front of the exhaust. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the pipe and we're going to take the can out. And the way to take this off, that's the easiest way to do it, is you can buy a spring compressor tool, or you can take a screwdriver and put a groove in it and essentially use that to take the springs off. So essentially there's three springs on the Y pipe. There's 2 springs holding the pipe down to the body, and then there's a couple of springs holding the can to the pipe, and then there's a couple of springs holding the can to the body, and then there's 2 more on the back side. So why don't we go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now with the exhaust and the can out of the way, first thing we have to do before we can pull the recoil, we have to remove the oil pump. And the oil pump is held on by 2 8mm bolts, right there, left and right. So let's go ahead and take the oil pump off. Alright, so the oil pump has been removed from the recoil housing, and right now it's just floating there. So what this is going to allow us to do, this is going to allow us to remove the 10mm bolts that are holding the recoil onto the engine. All right, there's one there, one there, one there. Couple wrap around a corner, and then there's one underneath right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove those. Again, those are 10mm, and pop the recoil off. Alright, so now that you have those 10mm bolts, the recoil literally just pops right off. And what we're going to do is, so we can get the handle off the end of the rope and without worrying about the rope going back into the recoil, we just have a set of vice grips on the end of the rope. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a pair of scissors. I'm going to cut off the existing rope off the handle and pull it through, and then that will allow us to get the recoil on the bench. Right? So now that we have access to the water pump, we'll go and talk about the water pump after we do the rewind on the recoil. Alright, so we have the recoil on the bench. So in case you guys never seen the inside of a Polaris recoil, essentially this is what it is. You have a plastic pulley, and then there's a pocket where the rope comes up, and essentially it pops up through that pocket. You tie a knot in it, and then obviously the recoil is under a spring. So what we're going to do is first we're going to clean up the recoil, get rid of all this stuff that's in here, and we're going to use some WD-40 and some rags versus brake clean, because sometimes a brake clean can be a little bit caustic on plastics. So we're going to use some WD-40 and rags and clean it up. And this is the rope that we're going to be using. Again, got it from SLP. Essentially this is AM steel. It's the synthetic winch rope, but SLP kind of takes it and offers it as recoil rope. So again, this recoil has 5,000 pounds of pulling strength, so I don't pretty sure you're not going to meet somebody on the trail that's going to be able to break that rope once it's installed. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean this up, and then we'll pull the old rope out, and we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and get this thing cleaned up. Alright, so the recoil has been cleaned up, and you'll thank me later for this, because the reason why you want to clean it up, because if you're accustomed to wearing gloves, there's really no way you can do this job wearing gloves, because you really need the dexterity, and this is why you want to clean the recoil, because otherwise if you don't, your hands are just going to turn to a mess. Alright, so what I've done at this point is I've screwed the recoil into the my workbench, and I have the rope pulled out all the way, and what I did is I actually counted how many times it went around. So essentially what that's going to tell you, and it's actually 3.5 times around. So what that's going to tell you is how many revolutions of preload that you're going to want on the spring when you're doing the rope, because the last thing you want to do is put the rope in and essentially not compress the spring enough and find out that you don't have enough preload, and then you have to do it all over again. So what we're going to do at this point, I'm going to cut the rope, I'm going to essentially let it essentially wind itself out, then we'll pull the knot out, and then we'll go to the next step. Alright, so the old rope has been removed, and I've put the new rope in, and essentially what I've done on the other side is I've taken a piece of electrical tape, put it on the end, and do that so it doesn't fray. And what I've done is I pushed the rope through the plastic recoil assembly, and it's right down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the preload on it. I'm going to essentially wind it 4 times, and then I'm going to come through the hole and grab it with a long set of needle nose pliers. This is the way I've always done it. I'm sure there's a better way of doing this, but I just don't want to deal with the spring assembly when you take that out. So if there's any thoughts on how you can do this better, throw a comment in the box. I would love to hear your tips and suggestions. Alright, so what I did is I pre-wound it. I stuck a drill bit into the alignment mark on the pulley, and you can't see it, but there's essentially a little stop on the casting of the recoil that essentially will stop the recoil from coming back. And what I've done is I fished it through the hole using a variety of picks and everything else, and I grabbed it. So essentially what we're going to do now is we're just going to pull the rope all the way through, and then we'll tie a knot on it, and then we'll allow it to pull it back in. Alright, so the rope has been pulled all the way through. Tied a knot on it, make sure it's tight, it's back in the pocket. And this is just what I always do. I always put a piece of tape over the end so it doesn't fray. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove that the stop and allow the recoil to pull the rope back in, and we're going to keep the rope tight as it's pulling in, because this rope does have a tendency to expand a little bit if it's not loose, so all we're going to do is hold it tight. Alright, so the rope has been loaded onto the recoil. You can see that's as far as it's going to go. We do have some slack on it, but essentially that's going to be just enough to get it out of the engine compartment and to the outside of the sled where we can tie the handle on it. So this actually works out pretty well. Alright, so why don't we go back to the sled and go through the process of changing that water pump. Alright, so I actually already took the water pump belt off. It was actually fairly simple to do. All I did is I removed the plugs so I could turn the engine over by hand. And all I did was I grabbed a screwdriver, and then as I was rotating the engine, I just basically walked the belt off the drive. So this is the belt I'm replacing it with. This is a Gates Power Grip GT3, part number 4505MGT-09. This is a substitute for the Polaris belt. This belt is about $10, I believe it was, compared to the Polaris belt, which is about $65. So I'll pause and let you guys dwell over that. So $65, $10. So alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put it back on. and I'll set you up so I can show you what I'm going to do to get it back on. Alright, let's get this water pump belt back on. Just slip it over the big pulley, just drag it over to the small one, and what we're going to do is we're just going to rotate it. And there you go, as simple as that. And the tension feels pretty good. Doesn't feel too loose or too tight. It's right there. And it's tracking nice and easy. So there you go. Changing the water pump belt couldn't be simpler. Very easy to do. So I highly recommend it. Alright, let's get the recoil back on. Alright, so we got the recoil back on, and the oil pump is attached to the recoil housing. The only thing that's left at this point is we're going to essentially put some pre-tension on the handle, pull that through, tie a knot on it, and go from there. So essentially what you want to do is kind of the same thing as what we did before we took it off. You're going to essentially pull it out a little bit so there's tension on it, right? And then pull it out about 4 or 5 inches. Put a vice grip on it so it doesn't pull the rope back. Alright, so we have a little bit of wiggle room on the handle when we're tying it, okay? So we're going to do that now. Alright, so we got the rope and the final routing attached to the new handle. The owner picked that out. I don't think I would have picked that out for myself. I don't think they're going to be able to get their gloves through the ring once they go to pull it, but we'll hold on to the old one just in case. There's still plenty of slack on the rope if we need to tie off a new knot on it. So the again, the rear coil is back on. Went ahead and put the retainer strap for the coolant hose back on. Forgot that initially. So yeah, there you go. Not that much involved to changing the rope on the recoil and changing the belt on the water pump. Pretty straightforward. So as always, thanks for watching. If there's any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and leave them in the comments box. If you haven't done so, please subscribe and click on the bell to get any updates on the sled, as well as my channel. I love to have you part of my community. Stay tuned for the next update. There will be a couple more things that are coming up, and we'll go from there. So, as always, thanks for watching, and have a great day. See ya.